Some places should be avoided, some floors should never be entered, and some secrets should remain buried. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. Tonight, we bring you two terrifying stories of those who ignored the warnings and paid the price. The last shift and the seventh floor doesn't exist. The last shift. Daniel had worked as a night security guard at Ridgeway Mall for nearly 6 years. The once bustling shopping center had fallen into decay, its last stores shutting down months ago. Now, the only thing left was silence, and Daniel, counting down his final shifts before the building was demolished. But as the mall emptied, something else seemed to take its place. Night 1, the boy in the food court. At exactly 2:33 a.m., Daniel saw something odd on the security monitor. A boy standing alone in the food court. He looked no older than 10, his clothes strangely old-fashioned. He wasn't moving, just staring directly into the camera. Daniel rushed to check, but when he got there, the food court was empty. No boy, no signs of trespassing. Then he noticed something wet on the floor. Footprints, small bare footprints. They led from the center of the food court to the emergency exit. But the door was still locked from the inside. His radio crackled. A whisper. A child's voice. "You saw me." Night 3. The woman on the escalator. The mall's power had been unstable for years. The escalators hadn't worked in months. But at 2:33 a.m., Daniel saw movement on the monitor. A woman in a black dress, gliding up the escalator. Her back was straight, hands clasped at her sides. The feed flickered, but just before the screen turned to static, she did something terrifying. She turned her head, completely backward, and grinned. Daniel sprinted to the escalator, but no one was there. Only a faint, rotting stench lingered in the air. Then, in the dead silence of the mall, he heard it. A whisper right behind him. "Why are you still here?" Night 5. The truth beneath the mall. Daniel decided he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. He searched the old manager's office and found a dusty file buried in a drawer. It detailed the tragedy from decades ago, an elevator collapse in the basement. 5 people were trapped inside. The mall sealed the shaft instead of recovering the bodies. His stomach twisted. The elevator shaft was right below his security office. Then, a sound. A single, slow, deliberate knock. Daniel froze. The knock came from the floor beneath him. Another knock, louder. Then another. Knock, knock, knock. The floor beneath his chair began to buckle. He jumped up as a crack splintered across the floor. Dust spilled upward as something pushed from below. Then, the lights cut out. In the darkness, the security monitors flickered back to life one by one. The food court camera. The escalator. The toy store. The main hall. All showed the same thing. 5 figures, standing still, watching him. The radio in his hand buzzed again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a chorus of screaming. Daniel didn't stop running until he reached the exit. He quit that night, refusing to ever return. The mall was demolished 2 weeks later. But before the last wall fell, workers found something horrifying. The sealed elevator shaft had been empty. The bodies were gone. Story number 2. The 7th floor doesn't exist. Ethan had just moved to a new city for work and found a cheap apartment in a tall, aging building. The landlord warned him about one rule. Never press the button for the 7th floor. It doesn't exist. Ethan laughed it off, assuming it was just an old superstition. But on his 3rd night, something strange happened. The wrong floor. After a late shift, He stepped into the elevator and hit 8. The old lights flickered, and the numbers glittered. The elevator shuddered and stopped. On 7, the doors slid open to a pitch-black hallway. No lights, no sound, just darkness. Then, the hallway breathed. A long, slow exhale, like something unseen had been waiting. Ethan slammed the close button, heart pounding. The doors hesitated, then slid shut. The elevator continued to his floor. That night, he barely slept. The voices. Over the next few days, Ethan started hearing muffled whispers through the vents. It sounded like voices, but the words were distorted, like they were underwater. One night, he pressed his ear against the vent and finally heard something clear. "Come back." The whisper came from below, from the 7th floor, the door that shouldn't exist. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He asked his neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, about the 7th floor. Her face turned pale. "There is no 7th floor." "Then why did the elevator stop there?" he asked. Mrs. Holloway gripped his wrist, whispering, "No one lives there anymore. Not since the fire. But sometimes, it wants someone new." That night, Ethan dreamed of a door. A tall black door with a rusted metal handle. In his dream, he stood before it, shaking, unable to turn away. A voice whispered from the other side, "You opened it last time. Open it again." The final descent. Ethan woke up standing in the elevator. The button for 7 was already pressed. The elevator descended. The doors slid open. This time, he couldn't look away. The hallway wasn't dark anymore. It was burned. The walls were blackened, and the air reeked of charred flesh. At the end of the hallway stood the door from his dream, and in front of it was a figure. A tall skeletal man with no eyes, just deep, hollow sockets. His mouth curled into a grin, revealing jagged, blackened teeth. He raised one bony finger and pointed at Ethan. The door behind him creaked open. Inside, something moved. The last thing Ethan remembered was the feeling of hands, dozens of hands grabbing him, pulling him inside. The elevator doors slammed shut. The aftermath. Days later, Mrs. Holloway told the landlord that she hadn't seen Ethan. They checked his apartment empty. His belongings were still there, his bed unmade. But when the landlord checked the elevator's security footage, his hands started shaking. At 3:33 a.m., the elevator went down to the 7th floor. The doors opened, but the feed glitched. For 3 full minutes, the screen showed nothing but static. Then the elevator returned to Ethan's floor. It was empty. Ethan was never seen again. But every now and then, when someone rides that same elevator, the button for 7 flickers on by itself, and a whisper echoes through the vents. "Come back. The world is full of places that hold terrible secrets. Some are forgotten over time. Others wait in the dark, searching for their next victim." Would you have dared to stay for one last shift? Would you have resisted the call of the forbidden floor? Or would you have disappeared like they did? Remember, reality is often scarier than fiction, and some doors should never be opened.